Yeah, this is my first live ever, man. This is the first time I've ever went live. We shall see if this works or not. I mean, who knows? Again, Peacock is not working. Yeah, man, I don't freaking got on my old beat up Adidas hat. I love this hat. I've had this hat for years, man. Yeah, this is the first time going live, man. Now we'll see if this works, man. We'll see what goes on. I don't know. It's totally different than This is different than TikTok. I'll tell you that right now. You know, I'll think about Twitch later. Again, yeah, I have no clue. Yeah, man, I might read a little bit. Read a little bit of book one. That's what I'll do. I'll read a little bit. We'll see if anybody comes in here and wants to hear me reading. Yeah, we'll go ahead and start reading. Oh shoot, I got people here. Yeah, I'm author Stephen GOWINS. I have a book for sale. It's www.foxcatcher.xyz. And I was gonna read. I'm gonna read some of book one. I'm actually working on book three right now, but I'm gonna start reading some book one. The year is 5034, and man has successfully colonized Mars and several other planets. On Mars, man lives in self-contained cities called landing bases. All of this progress is facilitated by the arrival of the core-based quantum computer, known as the Qs. These powerful devices are in the cores of Mars and Pluto. With the invention of the Qs also came a new breed of human known as scripts. On October 31st, 5024, a group of soldiers from Pluto penetrated Mars' mainframe and planted a virus known as a glitch. This caused most of Mars' system to go down, killing off large swathes of its crops and livestock. The virus also caused rioting among the humans connected to the core due to the script. Because of this attack, the criminal Mars began a very profitable business known as biofarming, growing DNA-altered animals inside the confined colonies. This caused a cycle of disease and unrest. So the leaders of Mars formed a special police force known as the Royal Police. This is the story of one Royal Police agent known as Indy Television. All right, we got chapter one. Chapter one. Supreme Allah was paced next to the platoon leader as a platoon of knights walked through the field. The green shocks of wheat were waist high. Allen, unlike most, had been to Earth briefly, so he knew how unnatural the hydroponic wheat field was. But to many who hadn't, they were ecstatic each time they patrolled them. They were miles underground. The walls were painted blue, and the rows of light lit the room up brightly. Each man was in a VLIP suit, and the suit automatically, like a deep-sea squid, blended to the background, portraying the rows of wheat behind them onto their suits, and giving them a half and half, cyan blue above the waist and portraying the green wheat below. The fan in the room made the wheat sway, giving the men a rhythmic look as they methodically filtered to the field. They sat silently watching. There was a few zone jumpers here. Uh, there's a few zone jumpers here. Hold on. The cameras had picked him up a few hours ago, alerting his platoon, which was out on a routine patrol. As of late, every other day they had a new batch they had to find. It was something going on topside that his platoon wasn't aware of. If a man or woman can make it to a monastery without the knights catching them, they can live inside it indefinitely, free from having to dodge the knights. On their linked up heads-up displays inside their helms, they could see a massive heat straight ahead about 20 feet. Allen's squad moved on in a line slowly. They would catch them. They were checking every square inch. That was the procedure. To his left, a man signaled, hand raised. He had something. On Allen's display, he saw a massive heat at the man's feet. Silently, they each passed the signal along, maintaining radio silence. The knights coalesced together in a semicircle, careful not to get in line of each other's fire. There were about 5 people. The sensors showed them hiding under a cheap thermal blanket. Allen's sensors saw straight through the thing. The private, known as Kosovo, on his immediate right, reached down and pulled back the blanket, and the father sprang up with a rusty dive knife. They all opened fire. The father instantly crumpled over, unalive through the chest, contorting his face, and he fell over. A few more shots riddled his corpse. I don't know. Well, I guess we'll just keep going. Cause I was thinking, I put this for kids. I put this live. This live was for kids, but I read it and I'm like, maybe that was a mistake. But I guess this is my first time streaming, so I wrote this, and it's the beginning is pretty violent. They all open. All right, so we're gonna skip a little bit. The squad captain called for 5 body disposal drones, but the men heard a whine. It was loud, clearly a baby. Corporal Vesper went over and turned the mother over as the body disposal drones appeared. The walls opening up and large optocopters appearing, 5 in a row. The men dampened the sound and began talking about what to do with the baby. They had to make up their minds quick. The drones were there. They could strap it to the mother and send it alive to the fertilizer pit. That's where these bodies went. They could unalive it and send it, and someone could take it to the closest monastery, a 10-mile walk. The vote came out. It was to go alive to the fertilizer pit. Allen raised his hand. I'll take him to the monastery, he said over the net. The platoon leader who held the baby, the child, he was just sitting silent in his hands, as if he knew his fate was in a balance. Allen was handed the child roughly and told to hurry up. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and walked towards the door, turned and watched as the octocopters lifted off with the bodies. He departed into the dark. The trek to the monastery was a 10-mile walk, easily, depending on which route you took. Allen slung his rifle around and placed the child oddly silent on his chest facing outwards. He would need both of his hands for the trek. Miles and miles of tunnels. They ran this way and that. It was a labyrinth of tunnels with pipes and low oxygen levels. Allen would have to take the longest route because of the child. Because the quickest route had many low oxygen areas which would unalive the baby. He had to be at least 6 months old, Allen reckoned. He named him Al Jr. quickly, and every now and then, the baby would coo or clap his hands, and Allen would pat his head. He dared to put a light on to keep the baby from experiencing the pitch black. And he made it to a fairly flat terrain after climbing up a ladder that was at least 1/8 of a mile long. Each rung the baby had almost cheered him on. When he got to the top, his arms and legs were burning. At the top, he stopped and took a breather and pulled out a salty fizz, the only drink he had. As he drank, little Al looked at him imploringly. He stopped and let him suck on the straw also. He made a face of shock, rapidly blinking as the salty fizz had carbonation. Alan sat down and looked at his new adopted son. He had a very curly hair that was long and a cheerful face. He was gnawing on his hand and drooling, completely fascinated by his hands. The Knights never took this route, and he would pass the fruit orchards. Most zone jumpers never got this far, as the designers put the wheat field on the outside, corn deeper in, and the fruit orchards deeper still inside. The monasteries were in the most inaccessible areas, surrounded by areas with little to no oxygen. The low oxygen didn't bother the Knights because they wore flip suits, a bioengineered deep sea squid that uses your body heat and perspiration to keep you safe and produce oxygen inside your suit. Tears and nicks didn't matter, as the squid could quickly heal a tear. If you could even call it a squid anymore, it had been bioengineered over thousands of years by the very same people he was going to visit. In boot camp, they stressed the importance that you take care of it, putting in a salt bath every night if possible. It can last 30 days without it, but it's best to do it every night. The squid actually grows sensors and powers lights on demand that Alan was using now. It was a living, breathing organism. Alan and little Al made it to a lighted tunnel, and his sensor told him this was a fully oxygenated tunnel. He kept walking, slinging him back into the outward-facing position, and every now and then he would let him grasp his hand. The little boy had a decent grip. He would make a gruff sound and then kick his feet out. In the fully lighted tunnel, he kept playing with the child. It was the last leg of the journey. The monastery was at the end of the tunnel. He knocked and the door opened. He had been inside the monastery before. The priests were usually kind, as most, not all, had some sort of developmental issue. But they were sharp people and usually had a hobby like making beer or wine, sometimes cheese, something good like that. And their jobs were servicing the robots that tended the fields. A father cipher took little Al, and the boy started crying and grasping for Alan. Alan teared up a bit, but a group of monks gathered, and eventually he stopped crying. A father handed Alan a large cup of beer, and they escorted him to a table and fed him some bread and lots of cheese and pieces of meat. Real meat, too, not the lab-grown stuff. A tech priest sat down that was in charge. You could see it in his face. Cardinal Picogram, he introduced himself as. "What did you name the child?" he asked. "Alan," Alan said. The cardinal had a stern face, but was stoically pleased that he had brought them a child. He saw them all rushing around excitedly. In fact, he was being fed, which never happened. The Knights were only invited inside with some refugee. The few that made it got violent and had to be taken out and disposed of, or taken back topside, depending on who was on duty that day. It was usually disposing. But they always told the priests they were relocating them. The Knights unalived most refugees they came across, so the priests hated them. The cardinal grabbed his hand and pulled it and thanked him. The two made eye contact, and Alan knew that he meant it. "We will name him Aluminium 342 in your honor." The men shook hands a few times, and Alan noticed a chain on his brown nose and a forbidden symbol cross, but he paid no mind. To it. They told him he was welcome back as long as he came along to see Aluminium 342. And then he gave him a golden coin in some language he didn't understand. The drink, see, I'm censoring this. The drink had Alan shaky, so he stopped by an apple orchard and gorged himself on apples. His unit had only been inside this particular grow room once, and their draconian platoon leader had ordered they keep their helms up the whole time. Small mechanical bees buzzed, and Alan looked down into a semi-transparent octagon-shaped tile and saw schools of fishes zigzagging between the roots. He sat down with around 3 apples and pulled out a golden coin and examined it. Gold was highly illegal on Mars, and few people had any either. The only reason Alan knew what it was, he was a senator's son. He had run away from home and joined the Knights of the Hydroponica. He was reminiscent, eating and examining the coin, and how the face of it looked different each way you viewed it. The face he had seen before was stamped on it, raised up, and odd symbols were splayed across it. He noticed a small notch and used his fingernail to tug on it. The coin felt like it had magnets inside, and the coin split into two and each of the interior sides had an eye painted on them. Allen placed the coins back together and they seamlessly clapped back into one. And he sat back on the tree and took another bite of his third apple. His wrist began buzzing and alarms began going off inside the grow room. Code 4 exercise. He had to hurry back to the barracks. He was missing the Martian Super Bowl anyway, he thought. He thought about Lil Allen too. He deployed his helm and sat at the nape of his back at a small compact pad on his back. The switch to deploy it was wherever you decided it should be. His was in his left thumb. The helm took about a second to deploy and seal. It was foldable glass and metal. But once it was on your face, the seams went away and it was paper thin also. Allen's helm sealed with a sucking noise. That's when he saw it. What he thought was an exercise was being dubbed as real. The battle net was still in exercise mode. He saw bogies, dots of hostile on the battle network. His helm beamed the feed into his right eye, tracking his eye motion. He shuffled through the network and tapped into his platoon. Even this far out, he had signal. He heard sheer panic. In exercise mode, when a team member unalives, the other alive are automatically promoted. Except the net had real bogies, unknown assailants, and frank requests for backup. Allen took off through the tunnel network, taking the shortest route he could have taken, carrying Lil Al because the oxygen levels would have unalived the boy. Allen tapped into the side of his hip in a pocket form that he slid a coin into. He stood up after that and took off, leaving the orchard room. He stepped into the dark. Alarm lights were flashing all over. Allen took off in the direction of his unit's barracks. His access kept getting ungraded. He kept getting promoted. He had been a Lance Corporal. Every time he got promoted, his display would pop up and tell him the new access he had. Congratulations, you've been promoted, to say. And then it would cut to the Commandant of the Hydroponic Knights. He would smile and say, congratulations, being promoted from a Lance Corporal to a Corporal is impressive. I'm going to walk you through the new features and the access, the data you now rate. Pay attention, this might save your life. The thing was you couldn't skip it. You had to listen to the whole presentation. By the time Allen was a mile from his barracks, he was a major. Each time the Commandant had beamed into his eye, he had to sit through the minute-long congratulations. Once he had hit lieutenant, it had just kept getting more elaborate and longer. He actually had to pause and sit down when it came on. Congratulations on being promoted from major to colonel. As you may know, colonel is a big responsibility. After all, only 1% of officers make it to such a prestigious and esteemed position. The same Commandant was on his display again. The message was longer, more personal now, and it took over his whole display. He could only imagine how this was playing out for the men actually fighting. He didn't get one anymore. This was the highest rank one could automatically be promoted to. He slipped into the back of the barracks and pulled up a map on his display to look for his unit. The map was similar. It just had more options than he was used to. He could see the trooper's face and what he was seeing simultaneously. He saw sheer terror on the men's faces as he cycled through the heads-up display with his eyes. Psychers from Pluto. How'd they get here? No time to think. He could hear the panic request for backup. Men sobbing and gasping. He finally figured out how to cut the feed off and get it to a manageable scale. After a few minutes of finagling, he located his unit. It was inside the core room. Allen sprinted down the halls of gray concrete till he was right by his unit, which was inside the core room. As he got to the room, heavy blast doors automatically opened. They were painted with orange and black stripes that said danger radiation. The core was huge and contained a large silver ball, so large it was hard to grasp how big the core room was. Bolts of electricity arcs were ever present, popping off in random places. He stepped out onto the catwalk and found all his unit. They were all of them huddled up with their rifles pointing towards the heavy doors in front of them. The door in front of them opened and a grenade was thrown in. Allen ran back as the blast was kinetic and had an EMP effect that shorted out their suits. His screen went clear momentarily. No data. As he turned back and watched the men in what was clearly Pluto's armed forces filtered in, firing. His unit fought until his platoon leader was shot, crumpling down, his lifeless body letting out a death rattle into the whole platoon's ears. They broke. Allen broke. He ran off. He had one option. He ran back towards the berthing area. He glanced over his back, and a few others from his platoon were running also. They had broken completely. Allen turned and glanced behind himself and booked a left out of the quarter room down towards central berthing. He dropped his rifle. Thinking of picking it back up, he looked behind him and the psyker was on him. Allen didn't panic. He heard a voice that whispered in his ear, "Pull out your knife." He grabbed his knife and grabbed the man's hand. He was heaving with his hip and he attempted to throw the man, but somehow it didn't work as the man charged forward, colliding his helm with Allen's. They fell on top of each other. Allen's unsheathed dive knife went through the man's chest, expelling a compressed gas, shooting a gallon of blood and flesh upward into the ceiling. Allen got up and left his knife. He kept running. He knew of a secret elevator. Allen's cousin had showed him it was for officers. His cousin Nero, now an ensign in the Knights, had seen him a month back. "If I was worried about you," he said earnestly, pulling Allen out of the chow line and making him get a detention for some supposed infraction. He made Allen do 8-count bodybuilders. Once the hallway was cleared, he would tell Allen a little bit of news. His sister had won her election. Allen didn't care, but he told Allen he should go and see his father and showed him a broom closet. It was near the officer's berthing area. The closet was full of brooms, and one broom was in the back with a red handle so far back and deep you'd never grab it. If you twisted the handle, a door opened behind it, and there was an elevator to the 1000th floor of the Nike Chrysler building. Allen had grown up on the 988th floor, so had Nero. So this was a deeply held secret, a lowly knight like him was never supposed to know about. As most knights were from the lower floor and were not under any circumstances allowed on the 1000th floor. It was called the Honey Tube, Nero had told him. Allen hadn't taken up the offer, as he was fine not communicating with his family, but now he was. He ran down the hall towards the broom closet and glanced back and saw 2 more psychers running his way. He slipped outside the broom closet quickly. He found a red-handled broom and twisted it. The door sprung open. He glanced behind him and a psyker was in the door as he jumped into the elevator. It was just big enough for one man, a small capsule-sized elevator. His momentum turned him around, and he leaped back out, kicking the man in the chest, knocking him back into the brooms. The door shut quickly, and the elevator shot off with a jerk. Mid-flight, it just stopped. And the lights went off, and the elevator jerked to a complete stop. A minute or two later, it started running again, jerking as it took off. After a few minutes, he was inside another broom closet, inside of a place of recreation. As the door opened, he quickly stumbled out, not wanting to be transferred back down to the slaughter below. He stepped out and heard nothing. He hadn't used it before and had no clue what to expect. Allen walked outside the room and saw a lady. She was in a pool, laying face up. He walked more bodies were laid out all over the place. Outside the room, he opened the door and recognized Laszlo's hookah lounge. He had been here before as a teen and spent hours here, but he never knew what was behind it, smoking and eating kebabs on the orange couches. But now it looked like a tornado had hit the place. As he walked outside the store, he saw crowds of people running. It was a full-on riot. Allen looked at the people. They looked crazed and wild-eyed. The crowd was too great to go against it. That's when he saw it. A man's head exploded, splashing his helm. Splat, another man exploded. He looked up. The helm in his suit directed him to where the gunfire was coming from. The screen automatically zoomed in to the top of the glass pyramid where dozens of knights with automatic weapons were set up. Sandbags. It was their brother unit. Set up with sandbags. It was a brother unit, the Knights of the Unknown. You never ran into these guys, just heard of them. But their suits were black. Hydroponic knights were green. Fire began raining down. He dropped and crawled over, grabbing a corpse and using it to shield himself. He had his shield on, but the caliber fire in the distance they were firing from would render it useless. He watched as the sparks flew up from the bullets. Eventually, a set of explosions dislodged him from the corpse he was hiding behind. He ran back to the Capitol building, the glass giant pyramid. Besides a few storefronts, the area was wide open and flat. A bullet hit Al in the chest. He dropped down, gasping for air, and unalived a few moments later. One of the knights of the unknown began cleaning up. One of them noticed Al's slip suits and plugged into it to get the data off of it. His body was shipped down to a Legion to the fertilizer pit, segregated from all the civilians. Tech priest, Cypher 456, had been one of the few successful zone jumpers, families from the first floor of the Night Crisis building. They had to get such a gruesome job. 456 had been caught in the nun quarters with several different sisters several different times. They would catch him and send him to pick up trash, and then he would be back a few weeks later. Yeah, I'm gonna skip that part. Alright. So they sent him down to the worst assignment at the worst time. Cole 742 had quoted the spaceman's Bible he had exiled 456. Hold the work of the tech in good conscience, which some of you having put away concerning the tech are now shipwrecked. Such a priest having put away the faith, deliver unto Satan that he may learn not to blaspheme. Now usually zone jumpers are scared for metal items other than their small pieces of silver and their pineal gland called the script. They had a special tool to get the small chip out of their skulls and punch through their head, extracting the very precious metal silver. Otherwise, they had nothing of value, so they would be thrown into the vat, clothes on. But the pile of knights were a different process. They had to keep their slip suits and any weapons. Tedious work. He had more than usual to do. He got the body. He took the suit off. The suit had healed up over the wound. He scanned and beeped. He was missing something. He patted the suit and felt a coin. He would use a scalpel and cut the coin out. It read in a Martian Latin word, the word recycle. He rarely saw these things, but it meant this unlucky guy was going to get cloned and have his memories implanted into the clone. The church did this, but there was argument whether it was truly them or another person with the memories of another in their mind. It was reserved for knights of merit. 456 put the coins on the man's eyes with the words recycle facing up and folded up his slip suit and wheeled it into another section, the cloning section. He placed the script finder on the Colt's skull and pressed. It bored into the skull and popped out a tiny sliver of silver. Too tiny to even see with your bare eye. The script finder simply flashed green when it had it. He placed the device into a washer and it quickly washed all the brain matter off the script and placed it into a pink bag, lifting the right coin up and placing it underneath. 456 took a break. He was done, walked to the shower unit. He washed the blood and gore off his slip suit and walked to the break lounge. He hated the ghoulish job, but he was exiled down here for a few more months. Scandium 647 was in a similar predicament as him. He was in the break enjoying his rations. That was the main problem with his job, besides the dead people and lack of females. The food. The cricket rations, bland and tasteless. It came in a small transparent tube. They called it tubular food. That was something. That was a brand that went out of production before 456 was even born. Compared to the monastery's typical fare, this was torture. 647 motioned them. The two had similar backgrounds, except he had grown up topside and his father, a mid-tier merchant, had fooled a few strings getting him admitted into the tech priesthood to dodge the draft of the asteroid wars. He went to the kiosk and grabbed his single ration and hastened to sit with 647. 647 was tall and dark as most topsiders were. He at least saw the sun and not these wretched artificial lights. He began in a low voice, even though it was just the two of them, and a few other monks were seated on the side of the room. This is an attack by Pluto. They came down here and take tone. I'm hearing they hit the core, knocked out a bunch of life support systems, 647 said in his low voice. 4056 had heard that, but nodded. He wanted to listen to see if 647 the only thing he had. Which ones? 674 said all of them. All right, all right. Let me get a little stretch in. Gotta stay limber. All right. 3 years later, a monk checked the cloning tank. He had one outgoing clone. He walked down rows and rows of empty tanks till he came to one of the few occupied ones. Years ago, before the attack, these tanks would all be occupied. Now they were only 10% occupied. Supreme Allah, the tablet read, memory restored. Station, New Eden apartment, 900-716704. The monk hit the drain button and clear saline-like fluid drained into the deck. The body had its eyes closed and was naked. It was suspended on the metal rods by the armpits and had a cup over the mouth and the nose. Small cups were over the eyes. The monk checked everything, the memory. He checked the vials. Everything was good. With the help of the mechanical arm that ran the length of the room on the tracks that could reach anywhere in the room, he pulled a man out the tank and onto the cart. He wheeled it up to the room where they did all the memory work and watched as a few monks worked over the young man. They tattooed the Knights logo on his left arms in bold green, the Martian equivalent of H and Y with the fat cheese symbol, but they did something a bit different. They coded a recycle symbol into the logo. That was the police model, top notch. This was a police model, top notch reflexes, high intellect, encrypted DNA, resisting all the new flus that had been plaguing Mars of late. They gave the thumbs up and loaded them to a gurney and sent it topside. All right. So we get to chapter 2. That was actually the first chapter. You know, my audience of 0 right now. Alan pumped his bike down a rocky road and onto a paved road. The bike jerked and jolted violently, but he stayed up. Once he hit the paved road, he pedaled faster and faster up the hill. At the top, he momentarily went airborne. Going over the top of the hill, he lifted up slightly and back down again. He descended quickly, using his feet to stop the speed of the bike, till he skidded to a stop in front of Michelle's Emporium. He got off his bike and went inside. The airlock was opening and letting Alan in, closing behind him with the audible hiss. He stepped inside. Michelle's Emporium was full of stuff Alan would never dream of buying. Trinkets, garbage in his eyes, the type of stuff old ladies bought. His mother would love this store. His mother would love this store. His helm on his slip suit checked the air quality and automatically folded up and rested back into a compact square on the back of his neck. He slung the backpack off his shoulder and walked directly to the computer. As usual, Michelle, an androgynous-looking man, Alan soon walked out from the back. He wasn't in a slip suit, as he lived in the store. He wore a plain white shirt and black pants, very plain, as people dressed on the outskirts. "What you got?" he asked briskly. Alan opened up his bag. He had steaks, chicken breasts, thighs, and 12 eggs all neatly packed up inside a bag with a few ice packs. The bag, once open, let out a frosty wisp of air that wafted up between the two of them. Michelle put on a pair of glasses and eyed the steak still frozen. Glasses were antiquated in this day and age. You could get 20/20 vision or augmented eyes for very little. Michelle Allen assumed just like wearing them. He pulled out an equally antiquated scale and placed all Allen's steak individually on the scale one at a time. Allen already knew the weights. He didn't conduct business through trickery. That was a quick way to get unalived. But Michelle struck him as a man of tradition, or whatever he was. 5 12-ounce steaks and a dozen eggs. This was Allen's fifth or so trip here, but he couldn't remember. He had so many stops. Business was booming as of late. Supply was tight at the moment. The Royal Police had stepped up their raids as of late and had been getting suspiciously lucky. Just last week, he barely made it out of one alive, but he loved the thrill of it all. The which it took being a bio farm courier. It was Landing Base 2. In Landing Base 2, the mecca for meat grow-ops, there had been a flu outbreak that brought the Royals with their flamethrowers. Alan had watched from the hill as they torched the building. watched as the fire brigades had quenched the flame only after the dilapidated building had collapsed. They had knocked the price of steaks up higher than they had ever been. 1 ounce per ounce of gold for meat. He had been doing his job for a few months, now practically ages in courier years. Most guys graduated from courier and quickly started their own grow ops. That was where the money was, they said. But Allen had balked at the thought of sitting inside of an apartment or old factory staring at plastic bins. Plus, from his own reckoning, being a courier was safer than doing grow ops as long as you took the routes less traveled. Michelle counted out the gold carefully, pulling out a velvet bag. The clinking broke the silence. The man didn't talk much, nor did he. Allen quickly calculated the courier fee. A whole ounce. When he had started, he would get a gram or two of gold dust, which is a whole month's worth of pay. I appreciate doing business with you, he said, and quickly walked out the store and back to his bike. He had a few more drops to make. Allen stopped at a few more stores before heading back home. The haul of this one trip was enough for a ticket to Earth alone. That ticket had been able to buy a month ago. That ticket he had been able to buy a month ago, but he had long had enough to immigrate and live in style when he got there. Home was an apartment on the Sky Bridge. He had found it upon getting advice from Stimulus and a jack that let you hack in and turn on water and electricity. It wasn't far from where he had grown up. It was a small room with a closet and a bathroom. All you had to do was move into a restricted area and jack into the system and turn the water and lights on. You could live stress-free. The area was a deserted ghost town. As most people had no access to the upper floors, they were mostly deserted. Graffiti and trash crowded the hallway, and Allen liked it just like that. He would check the trash to see if anyone walked through here, and few did. The apartment had a view, too, the stadium below and other buildings. He had grown up on the 999th and never been on his current floor prior to getting out of the nights. He had taken a few meaningless jobs. He rented a studio like the one he had now, except it was on the 599th floor. A few months before, on chance, at his waiting job, he had met a man who tipped in gold, a whole gram, a fortune for a waiter. The glitch had knocked out Mars' food supply, making food prices skyrocket. Most ate cricket rations like Allen did prior to this fateful meeting. Gangsters on Mars wore brightly colored suits, he remembered from movies his fathers had told him. That's what the gangsters in the 1940s on Earth wear. This man was a top gangster. His face was tattooed, his eyes blue like his suit. His whole eye was blue. That hadn't caught his attention. What had caught his eye was a woman. He gazed down at her porcelain skin marked with a few freckles, with her long, thick, bushy hair, and her cleavage had bits of glitter, tastefully sparse, tastefully subtle. Green eyes stared back, abused, the thick red hair of a voluptuous figure, no body modifications. Allen walked to the table, carried the beers, and placed him down. He didn't even notice the man. He was just staring at her. She made eye contact with him. Earnest eye contact for a second too long. He felt a strong hand grab his left arm. He turned and to his horror saw the gangster. The man eyed his arm. He had a blue smile, as even his teeth were blue. The smile reminded him of a trip to Earth and seeing chimpanzees smile. The wide, toothy smile and dead eyes were exactly the same. He served the table with haste, ensuring each dish was perfect before leaving the kitchen. Running back and forth, he made sure he didn't so much as glance at her. When they came to pay, the man placed a hand out and scanned out his wrist. The scanner picking up the barcode. And Allen scanned the man's wrist, the scanner picking up the barcode. He intently stared at the screen as the transaction went through. The man stood up. He was a head over Allen and placed his hat, also blue, on his head, a wide-brimmed hat. And he reached into his pocket, pulled out a card. Paper cost a fortune on Mars. It was paper, thick paper, with a glossy blue embossed with on a white background. He said, "I like you. You got good taste and balls. If you ever want to make some real money, come to Club Sodom and ask for Benny Bodega." He handed Allen the card, and the lady walked off. Alan palmed the card, and he noticed it had a small gram of powdered gold on the back. The card said Club Sodom, entry 1. All right, I guess we'll stop right there. I guess that's a pretty good time. I've been going for 40 minutes. You know, yeah. Again, my book's for sale on Amazon and Apple. Yeah, it's available on both of them. The book's name is www. The book's title is www.foxcatcher.xyz. On Apple, I have 2 books out. This one and its sequel. In a few weeks or months or whenever I get finish it, book 3 should be coming out. And now in like a certain part of the trilogy, but I think we're gonna make it into four books. That's the plan right now. So I'm about halfway done with another book, and I've got the idea for another book. I'm gonna call it Streamer Wars or something like that. I don't know what I'm gonna call it. But yeah, I got that one coming up too. I actually might get off here and start working on it pretty soon. Um, but yeah, man, that's what I got going on. So yeah, I just went live today. First time I read half of chapter, well, all of chapter 1, part of chapter 2. Yeah, if you're interested, check out the book. It's available. I should have a physical copy pretty soon. And yeah, man, you guys have a nice day. Thank you for your time.